Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. As I've mentioned recently, I'm going to be weaving some lessons and inspiration from college football into the podcast because it's not only something that I love, but it's something that we can learn so many lessons from regarding life, relationships, business, growing as a person, and healing. And even I'd say so much more. In episode 36, I spoke about managing expectations through the lens of the firing of Penn State University's head coach, James Franklin, and how, if our expectations aren't aligned with reality, we're going to get into some trouble. But knowing who you are and having awareness mitigates this. And so today I'm really excited and I'm sporting my scarlet and gray because we are going to be covering Ohio State University's national championship that they just won earlier this year. And it's a team near and dear to my heart since I'm an alum. I've been a crazy, rabid fan since I went there. Had a little trouble because I had been a Notre Dame fan my whole life. But as soon as I got there, I was, kind of sucked into the magnitude and the energy and everything that it was. I'll also give you the caveat. I am realistic. I'm not one of those people who goes crazy, like, saying fire the coaches, get these players off the field, because I am well aware that it is a game. First of all, it's being played by human beings that are not perfect, and we can't expect perfection. And just like we give ourselves grace, we need to give them grace as well. And I know that there are probably people out there who would, kind of poo-poo what I'm saying, but, that is your opinion and your feelings, and you're entitled to that, but that's mine. This is where I'm at, because I think that college football is a place where we can come together and bridge the divide instead of using it as a place for divisiveness and, some of the negativity and vitriol that we're seeing out there in the world that, might be bleeding over into that sport that we all love. So last year, as a fan, it was a roller coaster ride of epic proportions, to say the least. The main thing that stood out to me, though, as somebody who works with people's minds and emotions, I was equally parts fascinated and curious. Why did this team go on a tear in the playoffs? What changed after that Michigan loss? I had so many questions, but as their playoff run went on, I had this strange feeling that they were becoming largely unstoppable, right? For several reasons. And we are going to dive into the 3 keys today, as well as lessons that we can learn from them. So we are going to cover responsibility and accountability, how the Michigan loss catalyzed a come to Jesus moment where everyone from the players to coaches were called out and stepped up. The second piece is belief, how belief in yourself, each other, having a common goal and a higher power are the primary and most significant reason that they righted the ship. And 3, having a strong foundation. The Ohio State football team used a brick by brick metaphor to emphasize the importance of the daily practices, the mindset, and everything that goes into building a strong foundation for success. And I truly believe that when we break this down, we will find all of the lessons in this that we can also apply to our own lives. If you're curious as to if you have any stored emotions or trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your highest goals, or even just showing up as the best, most authentic version of yourself, I invite you to take my free stored emotions and trauma quiz, and you will find that link in the show notes. So let's get into it. Like I said, last year, to say it was a roller coaster was, it's almost like an understatement, because Ohio State lost to Oregon in a very close game at the very beginning of the season. And that was a game that, everyone knew it was going to be close. So it wasn't that big of a, that wasn't that big of a deal. But as the year went on and they became, better and improved and, built on their foundation, they came to the end of the season and they were projected to beat their arch rival Michigan by quite a bit. And then they lost the game. And even the Michigan coaches at the end of the game were like, well, we can't believe that they went with that game plan because it didn't make sense. They didn't stay true to who they were. And that's a big piece of the puzzle too. Staying true to who you are, doing what you know, what works for you, and following your core values and believing in them are a lot of reasons why we have success in life and why they did not have success in that moment. Because for what I would say is reasons of kind of a stubbornness and I'll show you type of mentality that was coming from the coaching staff, which I would say tends to be very ego driven. That was the primary reason they lost. It wasn't, the players for the most part played really well. And so it was interesting for me to watch that. And yes, I was frustrated. And, a lot of fans out there were kind of losing their, about all of this. And I sat back because I definitely have a different perspective on all of this. Like I mentioned before, I understand the human element. I understand the emotions. I understand the mindset. I understand that even with the best players and the best laid plan, sometimes we falter. It's because we're human. We are human. We are not perfect. And so there was something inside me that was like, disappointed, but I was like, something's going to come of this because that particular team and group of individuals had a certain air and energy about them. They were very connected. They all had a very strong spirituality. For those of you who aren't fans or pay attention to college football, because I am a fan of not only Ohio State, but I am a fan of college football. And so I pay attention to what's happening with all of the teams out there. And I really like to note the cool and positive stories that come out of that realm. And for them, they actually had a lot of players that became more religious and spiritual during that season. A lot of them, they showed some videos online of some of them getting baptized and how they all pray together. And there was a very deep-seated foundation there in that aspect of belief and trust. And we're going to get into this more, but I think that was a huge piece of the puzzle. But because of all of the things I had been watching as the year played out, I really thought that the seeds of magic were planted there. And I knew something good was going to come out. So let's rewind to what happened after that loss to Michigan. So after they had that loss, this is where that responsibility and accountability comes in, because the players called on that Tuesday. Truly it was an unimaginable loss. And so that Tuesday, the players held a players only meeting plus the head coach, Ryan Day, and they aired it all out. They aired out all of the dirty laundry. Egos had to be checked and surrendered. And it was a space of raw emotions, brutal honesty, and really, really difficult conversations that were long overdue were had. It was like when they talk about it like it was kind of like a family meeting where, there can be a lot of tensions. Sometimes, there are words thrown about, and once that, the emotions and that dirty laundry is aired, it allows for healing and movement to take place. You can choose to stay stuck in that moment, right? Or you can choose to take that and build momentum and learn from it. And like I had mentioned before, that, egos being checked and, surrendering to the process is a really big piece of the puzzle. And you hear me talk about this all the time. I am a big fan of surrendering because you can only push so far. You can only try to control things so far. And that's what they saw in that outcome. They lost because they were trying to control a narrative or even respond to a narrative and push an outcome the way that they wanted it to happen. And it didn't happen. So you go back to the drawing board. You take responsibility and accountability for your actions and the part you played, not only in that moment, but how, what unfolded throughout the whole season. And that is something that I have spoken about quite a bit in the last several months on the podcast, that responsibility and accountability are huge. And I would also say something that we are largely missing from society now. There's been a shift to divisiveness and blame from the space of, you know what? Hey, I did something wrong. This is on me and I'm going to own it. People don't do that anymore. They're always looking for places to blame and people to blame. And I could give you tons of examples of that, but I really don't want to waste my energy on it because I'm making a concerted effort not to engage my thoughts, energy, feelings in that space. So yeah, that first key, taking responsibility and accountability and literally telling the, brutal, honest truth. That is how we upgrade, how we evolve, how we move forward, not only as individuals, but as groups and societally. So that result was, those players, they felt seen, they felt heard, they felt validated. And that resulted it resulted in change, right? Positive change. They went back to the drawing board and had a renewed fire, passion, motivation, and belief, right? And belief is that second key. And I would say it is the most significant piece of the puzzle as to how and why they rated the ship, right? They were in a sink or swim moment, right? They could have, dug their feet in the sand, dug their heels in the sand, right? And said, we're going to keep going with this narrative. We're not going to change. We're just going to do what coaches, what we think is right. But those players chose to stand up because of their belief in each other and themselves and their common goal. And I would also say that higher power, that piece of the puzzle, those were all the reasons they actually decided to, get together, because I know they had spoken about behind the scenes. There was a lot of talk because they played the game on Saturday. They had the meeting on Tuesday, right? There was a lot of talk in between the Saturday loss to Tuesday when they had the meeting, amongst themselves, and they knew what needed to happen. And I would say that one of the reasons that they were able to have the passion and the wherewithal and the guts and courage to actually step up and say, hey, Coach Day, we need to do something about this. We need to have a meeting, players only plus you, that takes a lot of courage. And again, in society, we are not seeing, I will say this, I think we're seeing some of that. We're seeing the tides turn in some ways, but in a lot of ways, we're not quite seeing that, people stepping up and taking a stand for the things that don't sit well with them. And I would say is take a stand against things that they don't believe in and for the things they do believe in. And so that was also really, fascinating to me too, because like I said before, I think it's the second piece of the puzzle, but also the most important catalyst, even though, there were other pieces of the puzzle, like I said, like the meeting and other things that had taken place. And belief is absolutely crucial in any success in life. And so the third piece of the puzzle is the strong foundation. Ohio State, the football team, uses a brick by brick metaphor to both symbolize and emphasize the importance of, that daily practice and putting in the work and the mindset and, building a strong foundation for success. And it was really interesting because after they won the national championship, there were a lot of, TV specials made about them and some documentaries. And one of them we were watching, and it showed them they actually have, it's like a little brick pyramid. And after they won the national championship, they put the last brick on the top. So it was really kind of cool to not only hear about that metaphor, but to see it in action, right? So they showed, them all of the bricks that they had laid, every time they had a practice, every time, positive things had happened. So it was really cool to actually see that, because in our lives, I talk about, that foundation is everything. It is everything. And you need to have that to be able to build on it. And I would say that foundation that they had, it allowed them to have a cushion or a safety net after the losses and the challenges that they faced. Because I've only spoken about, the 2 losses, but they also faced a lot of big challenges. They lost a lot of key players during the season as well. And I'm not going to lie, every time, like, some of them were linemen. And if you know anything about football, especially offensive linemen, that offensive front is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle in your success and being able to execute your offensive game plan. And so there was a little bit of me that I felt that, like, almost died a little bit when every time we lost those players. But we were losing players, to injuries, and every single time somebody else stepped up, the next player up, the next player filled in that space. And it's cool to see that too, because it allows those, either newer players or a little less experienced players to step up and show what they're made of, right? So building on that foundation and having that, robust planning and rigor is really, really important to building that foundation and having success. And this is why I speak about the foundational pieces of the puzzle often, regarding lifestyle and emotional and spiritual health. If you have those foundations, you really do have so much more just resilience and capacity. And when you have challenges, it allows you to pick yourself up and, get back on the wagon again, quickly, instead of feeling stuck and not being able to move forward. So the last thing I really wanted to talk about were the lessons that we can learn from this, because, like I have said, and I will maintain, that watching sports of any kind, but especially football, because football in general, it is a team sport, but it's a team sport like no other. You've got a lot of pieces of the puzzle on both sides of the ball, right? You've got 11 players on each side of the ball. And in order for things to, to have success and things to play out the way that you want them to, of course, we all want to win, right? But in order for that to happen, that those 11 players need to be aligned. They have to have belief. It's as if it's a symphony that's being conducted. And I have, long been, a fan of the game, but also been fascinated by those aspects of it. I'm also fascinated by the kind of the chess match that happens between offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator and strategy. There's so much fun stuff that we can glean from football. But for me, I've always been more deeply tied to college football because there's something about it, right? There's something about, that, like, unbridled passion for your team. And, just how when we all come together, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, where you live, what your job is, what, how much money you make, what your beliefs are, from a kind of religious and spiritual, political standpoint, all of that stuff. We're just all coming together as one, to enjoy the game, cheer on our teams. And that's huge. That is, there's something pretty magical about that. And I think when we get caught up in all of the, everything that's going on. There's a lot of stuff going on in college football right now, if you're not aware, and I'm not going to get into that today, but it's changing and it's changing fast. It's evolving, I would say, at a more rapid clip than ever before in its, over 100-year history. College football's been around for a really, really long time. Like I said, I feel like there is so much we can learn from it. And today I'm going to give you 3 lessons that we can pull from Ohio State's national championship run. So the first one is that having a strong foundation not only provides resilience when things get tough, but also the building block when things get tougher and start to, kind of seemingly fall apart, right? It gives us that internal knowing. And that's what those players had, right? It gives you that trust that in knowing inside that everything's going to be okay, even though things are seemingly falling apart around you. And that is something I talk about a lot. And I obviously like the health foundations, right? All of your lifestyle practices and what you eat, the basics, right? Moving your body, getting good sleep, eating a healthy diet, all that basic stuff, that matters a lot. But the more you have a strong emotional and spiritual foundation, I'd say the more success and the stronger success you're going to have. It's really interesting because I like to talk about this from the emotional and the nervous system regulation standpoint. And ironically, I had an appointment with a patient yesterday who started off as a functional medicine only. I worked with her and her kids, and then she decided to do, some of the emotional trauma and, self-growth work, nervous system regulation with me. And yesterday, she's like, I really want to share something with you. Because she, when I first met her, was like a lot of moms, very frazzled, overwhelmed, overextended. There was just a lot going on in her life. And she didn't have the emotional bandwidth to handle it, even though she had a really strong spirituality. And, kind of religious belief, definitely a strong belief in God and, her religion, her church, all of that. But she just did not have the emotional, wherewithal to handle all these things. And she has quite a few kids. So I'm not going to put out details because I don't want to, she actually does listen to the podcast. So if you're listening, hi. But yeah, I don't want to give out any kind of identifying details. And really the only people that would know is probably her and her family. But I like to keep things, very vague for those reasons. And so it was interesting because her now versus her when I first started working with her, night and day. And in the past month or so, 4 to 5 weeks, she had a lot of things come up. Some things, within the family. There was a loss, some things happening to their home. All of this stuff kind of poured down on her in 1 week. And she's like, you'd be so proud of me because in the past, I would have just lost it and it would have consumed me. But she said, I didn't this time. She's like, I had, the resilience to realize that these were factors outside of my control. I maintained my calm. I maintained my, my cool. And I worked through all of these without getting, worked up or letting myself get into a tizzy or feeling like I have to control things or do things. And that more than anything makes my heart so happy because that's what I want for people. That's where the magic is. The ability to face life's challenges and, with grace and surrender and knowing and trust is huge. That's invaluable. And I can say I've actually been going through a little bit of that too. And I find myself coming back to those thoughts, you know that you're going to be okay. This moment might suck, but you're going to be okay. So to me, like that is the greatest gift. And to me, the biggest compliment as somebody who does this work with other people, for them to tell me that they're in that place. It just, like I said, more than anything else, it makes my heart so happy. The other thing is one of the other big things is like when we get a little one who's sick better, that always makes my heart very, very happy too. But that in and of itself for moms, because everyone has their life struggles, but moms have a hard path. They've got a lot on their plates, and often they're the last ones that get taken care of. And I was so happy when she chose herself and said, hey, I'm going to do this emotional and trauma and, inner work for myself. I was so proud of her, because she is one that had always put family and everything else before herself. And family is important, but you need to be a solid, healthy, aligned and tuned and regulated person to be able to show up well for your family. So it is not, no matter who you are, mom, dad, another, family member, it's really important to take care of yourself. So number 2, is that, that taking responsibility and accountability are keys to self-leadership and having success in all aspects of your life. It's hard to say, this is not working and it's on me, I'm part of the problem. That is a very difficult thing to say. I know, because I've done this, I've been in this space for years, and I have done a ton of healing and a ton of inner work and, mental, emotional, spiritual, all of it. And it's still like, I'm usually very cognizant and aware of when something is my fault or I have contributed to something. But hearing it in your head and saying it in your head is very different than saying it out loud to whoever else is involved. It's a challenge. And like I always say, like, with great, kind of great risk is great reward. And it's risky. It's risky to be vulnerable and say those things. It's also risky and vulnerable to say, hey, I'm not feeling good. I need to address some things that are going on inside me. That first step is dang hard too. It really, really is. But the rewards, like I said, great risk, great reward. The rewards that you get in the end are huge. And I would say, they're priceless, because it provides you with all the, kind of gifts we've been talking about today, the ability to, have resilience and, take responsibility, take accountability, and also develop that belief in yourself, right? And so that's number 3, that belief in yourself and a higher power are non-negotiable. What I have seen in this, I also want to start off by saying this. Belief in a higher power does not equal belief in a religion, right? That is something that I feel like in the last 5-10 years, at least very much in the United States, but I feel like it's happening globally. That's what people kind of equate. But I know lots of people who have a belief in a higher power. They might not call it God. Some people call it God. Some people call it spirit, source, creator, the universe, the higher power. They call it the higher power in and of itself. That's fine. And people are all on their own journey. If you identify with a religion and that makes you happy and, brings, happiness and joy and goodness to your life, that's great. But I'm also going to say that that's not the only way to define it. There are lots of ways to have spirituality and connection and a belief a belief in a higher power. And what I will say is the people that I've worked with over the years, and this is collectively across my, kind of 2-decade career, the ones who have that belief in a higher power are the ones who really do, I don't want to say just succeed, but flourish and thrive. I feel like the people who kind of identify as not having a belief in anything, or my beliefs are purely scientific, there's a ceiling that they hit. Because when you have that belief in a higher power, you realize that there are things out there that are bigger than you, right? And that we are all connected, and that there's things out there that we can't quite explain, but they have a positive influence on our lives. And those are the people that I have seen, including myself, right, that have been able to like get to these places. I will say I had a hot minute where I was raised Catholic, kind of went on my own spiritual and religious journey, and then kind of said, "Oh, I'm all in on science," and then came back around, right? Because I do believe in God, and to me, God is that creator. God is the energy that unites all of us, it unites all of us in love. And so that's why I tell people, like, it's really important also to honor other people's points of view and understand that we don't know what's right. None of us truly knows what's right or what the absolute truth is. I don't think that we are going to find that out until until we pass. Until we pass, depending upon, what your belief systems are, you're gonna find some things out after the fact, right? But that belief in yourself and that belief in that higher power are, like I said, non-negotiable, because that's what gives you that faith, right? When you are, let's just say, a business person and you're just starting out, it takes a lot of belief in yourself and faith to take that first step and say, hey, I've got this idea. I want to make this, kind of intangible idea into something real, something that's real and something that's tangible. And I want to, I want to make it something. I want to grow it. I want it to expand, right? And every single time you take one step forward, you get your, S corporation or LLC or your, C corporation, you do that, you file the papers and you make your website and you do your branding. That's another step. And the belief gets stronger and stronger and the faith gets stronger. And then you start marketing and then you start, getting yourself out there and telling people about it, and the energy and momentum build. And then that belief in yourself builds too with every little step you take, every positive experience and positive outcome. You will have setbacks. It is impossible to live life without setbacks and have a business without having setbacks. But that belief in yourself and that higher power gives you the resilience and the foundation to be like, you know what, that sucked, but I'm going to keep going. Right. And so that's something I really want all of you to hear, because that I used a business analogy, but that applies to everything. It applies to kids in school, family relationships of all kinds. It really extends to everything. And also the another piece of the puzzle is like having grace. Belief is one thing, and belief with just constant pushing is going to kind of lead to burnout, but also lead to, there will eventually be like imbalances, right? Because you also have to give yourself some grace and surrender to things that, just the process that unfolds, surrender to that divine power, and surrender to the things you can't control, because you can't control everything. And I think that's a really hard lesson for many of us to learn, whether you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, a practitioner, a type A personality, which I will say that's a trauma response, because I was that person too, that driver, got to push and achieve, right? That only gets you so far. Eventually you're going to hit a wall of many things, and you probably will be lacking energy, not feel fulfilled, not feeling aligned with your purpose. There will be lots of things that come up if you just keep on going about that life and business in that way. So I hope you really enjoyed this podcast. And I truthfully, I always say this, but I love hearing from you. Drop it in the comments. Did this resonate with you? Do you have your own stories? Because I would love to hear that. I'd love to hear what team you're a fan of, any of that type of stuff. So you can drop a comment in the, in the comment section of YouTube. You can send me a message, a DM. You can send me an email. All of that stuff is on not only, contact information on the show note pages, but also in, there are links. There are links that you can find to reach out. And I always love hearing from all of you. And as always, sending you lots and lots of love.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.